Hey everyone, ready to map out the invisible?
Today's deep dive is all about social networks, but forget scrolling and liking.
We're cracking open the Oxford Handbook of Social Networks to uncover the intricate web of connections that shape our world, from everyday interactions to global systems.
You with me?
Absolutely.
Let's go.
This handbook is a goldmine of information, revealing how these invisible networks influence everything from our career paths to the spread of ideas.
Okay, so before we go full-on matrix, let's start with the basics. What exactly are social networks?
At their core, social networks are patterns of relationships between individuals, groups, or even entire societies. It's about understanding not just WHO, but the opportunities and constraints those connections create.
Think of it as a map of human interaction.
So like a giant game of connect the dots, but instead of a cute picture, we get insights into how society functions.
Exactly. Each dot represents a point in the network, a person, an organization, a community. The lines connecting those dots represent the relationships between them, like friendships, family ties, professional collaborations, or even just the exchange of information.
So it's not enough to just analyze who's connected to whom.
We need to look at the bigger picture, those intricate patterns of connection, to really understand how things work.
You've got it. Now, the handbook takes us beyond this basic understanding and dives into different ways of looking at these networks. For example, they differentiate between connectionist and positional approaches.
Okay, I'm sensing things just got real moment. Can you break those down for us?
Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to understand why people become friends. A connectionist approach would focus on how your existing friendships influence who you're likely to befriend in the future.
So if most of my friends are into, say, collecting vintage board games, I'm more likely to befriend other board game enthusiasts. Makes sense.
Exactly. But the positional approach takes a different angle. It argues that our position within a network limits our choices, regardless of personal preferences.
So even if I secretly dreamt of being a champion chess player, if everyone in my network is playing Monopoly, my chances of finding a chess buddy are slim to none.
Precisely. It's about recognizing how the structure of the network itself shapes our options.
So how do researchers actually study these invisible networks? It's not like we can observe them under a microscope.
You're right, it's tricky. The handbook outlines several methods, each with its own strengths and limitations. Surveys are common. Researchers might ask people to list their closest contacts or use targeted questions to map out specific types of relationships.
That makes sense, but what about those connections we forget to mention, or relationships that exist primarily online?
You've hit on a key challenge in network research. Researchers try to account for these limitations by using a mix of methods. Some use name generators, which involve asking about specific types of contacts, like who you'd turn to for advice at work, or who you confide in about personal matters.
It sounds like a game of social network detective.
It kind of is. And of course, researchers must also consider the ethical implications, especially when studying sensitive connections. Informed consent and privacy are paramount.
Right, because not all connections are created equal. Some are deeply personal, and people need to feel safe sharing that information.
Absolutely. But to really understand cause and effect, sometimes researchers turn to network experiments.
Okay, network experiments. This sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Imagine this. Researchers create a controlled environment and manipulate connections within a group to see how it affects things like information flow or decision-making. It's like a real-life simulation.
So they're basically playing social network matchmaker. I bet they get some interesting results.
They do. But designing these experiments ethically and rigorously is crucial, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The handbook dives into how these methods are applied to all sorts of social phenomena, from the spread of trends to the formation of political alliances.
So we've got the basics down. But it's not just about mapping the dots and lines, right?
Absolutely.
The handbook also talks about different lenses for understanding how these networks function.
Think of it this way. You can look at the same network through multiple lenses, each revealing different insights.
One lens might be action theory, which explores the interplay between individual actions and the network itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that play out in the real world?
Let's say you're surrounded by people who prioritize fitness and healthy eating.
Action theory suggests that you're more likely to adopt those habits yourself, not just because of their influence, but because your actions and choices become intertwined with the network's norms.
It's like a self-reinforcing cycle. Our network shapes our choices, and our choices solidify our place within that network. The handbook also mentions something about culture's influence on networks, right?
Absolutely. Culture is like the invisible hand shaping the contours of our networks.
One fascinating concept the handbook explores is duality. The idea that analyzing the links between different types of networks can unlock even deeper cultural insights.
Okay, duality sounds a bit like a concept straight out of a philosophy class.
Can you give us a real-world example to make it clear?
Of course. Imagine you're studying the world of art. You could create one network map showing connections between artists who collaborated, influenced each other, etc. Then create another map showing connections between different art movements, their shared philosophies, techniques, and historical contexts.
So two separate maps, one for artists and one for art movements.
But how does duality come into play?
Here's where it gets really interesting. By analyzing the links between those two networks, which artists were key figures in which movements, how movements influenced each other through shared artists, we uncover a richer, multi-layered understanding of the art world.
It's like we're adding a whole new dimension to our understanding, going beyond individual connections to see the broader cultural forces at play.
Exactly. And that principle of duality can be applied to all sorts of networks.
Imagine mapping political actors and their ideologies, or even mapping the spread of a virus alongside patterns of social interaction.
It's like a cultural X-ray, revealing the hidden structures behind seemingly disparate phenomena.
Precisely. And speaking of uncovering hidden structures, there's a thought-provoking section in the handbook about network inequality.
It delves into how these invisible connections can either perpetuate or challenge social hierarchies.
So not all nodes on the network are created equal.
Some have a clearer path to success than others just based on who they're connected to.
Exactly. Imagine a job seeker fresh out of college versus someone with decades of experience and a vast professional network. Who do you think has the edge in landing a coveted position?
It's not just about what you know, it's who you know. And in this case, who knows you know. But how does this network inequality actually play out?
Think about access to resources, information, and even social mobility. Someone deeply embedded in a network of influential people might hear about opportunities before they're even publicly advertised. They have mentors to guide them, connections to open doors, and a safety net if they stumble.
Whereas someone on the periphery of those networks might struggle just to get their foot in the door, even if they have the same skills and ambitions. It's like starting a race several steps behind.
Precisely. And that raises questions about fairness and opportunity in a world where social capital, the value we derive from our connections, can be just as important as financial capital.
So we've talked about how networks are structured, how they're influenced by culture, and how they can either reinforce or challenge inequality. But networks aren't static, are they? They're constantly evolving. What does the handbook say about understanding these network dynamics?
You're spot on.
Networks are dynamic, always in flux. The handbook dives into various modeling approaches to capture these ever-changing patterns.
One particularly fascinating approach is agent-based modeling.
Agent-based modeling. Sounds high-tech. Break it down for us.
Imagine a computer program where each agent represents an individual within a network. These agents are programmed with certain characteristics and behaviors, and researchers can simulate how they interact and make decisions based on their connections and the information they receive.
So it's like creating a virtual world.
To study how individual choices ripple through a network, changing the overall landscape.
Exactly. These models can simulate things like the spread of rumors,
The adoption of new technology.
even the emergence of social movements.
That's wild. It's like SimCity, but for social scientists. What other modeling tricks does the handbook have up its sleeve?
Well, they also dive into something called exponential random graph models, or ERGMs.
Okay, I'm already lost. ERGMs. That sounds a bit intimidating.
I promise it's not as scary as it sounds. Think of ERGMs as a way to analyze the probability of certain network patterns occurring based on various factors.
So like predicting the likelihood of two people becoming friends based on their shared interests or their social circle.
Exactly. But ERGMs can analyze far more complex scenarios. For example, imagine you're studying international relations.
An ERGM could help predict the likelihood of two countries forming an alliance based on factors like geographic proximity, economic ties, or even shared history.
So it's a way to find hidden patterns and predict future connections based on a whole bunch of different variables. Pretty powerful stuff.
It really is, and it highlights how network science is about more than just describing connections.
It's about understanding the forces that shape those connections and using that knowledge to make predictions about the future.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the basic definition of social networks to these mind-blowing modeling techniques. For someone just wrapping their head around all this, What's the key takeaway? Why does all of this matter?
The biggest takeaway is that social networks are not just some abstract concept. They're the invisible architecture of our lives. They influence who we befriend, what information we're exposed to, the opportunities we're offered, and even the choices we make.
So by understanding these hidden networks, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Precisely. It's like gaining a new pair of glasses that lets you see the world with fresh eyes.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What hidden patterns are shaping your own journey? What connections have led you to where you are today? And how can you use this newfound understanding of networks to create a positive change in your life and your community?
Those are questions worth pondering.
They certainly are. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of social networks. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and remember, you're always part of something bigger than yourself.